As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
Part of sovereignty is having courage to feel. But when you allow yourself to feel, just like a little child allows themselves to feel, they have no choice, right? Their emotion runs through their body. How long does their anger last? A couple minutes. How long does an adult's anger last? It can last an entire lifetime if they don't process it, they don't feel it.
That was Emma Seppälä on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are four experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
I'm here with Debbie to talk about today's episode with Emma Seppälä, who is an expert on happiness and is here today to talk to us about how we can reclaim our sense of freedom and energy and power. So, Debbie, what were your reactions to today's episode?
Well, I just couldn't believe how much ground the two of you covered in this conversation. It made me want to check out the book because you talked about everything from habits like sleeping and eating vegetables and not just, scrolling around on your phone all the time, to groups and relationships and how to be one of these people that kind of, recharges other people and ways to be supportive and how teams can function effectively, to how we can move beyond the expectations that are on us and sort of carve out our own genuine path in life. So I was amazed how much ground you covered. It's almost like this episode could be how to live effectively or something like that. It was just great guidance for so many areas. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you hear in the beginning of the episode, I tell her I love the way she structured the book that we're talking about, because she really does cover all the different ways we can get bound in our life, how our self, our thoughts, our feelings, our bodies, how all of these things can become kind of stuck. And then how to get unstuck from those things and live in a way that is more free and, empowering and all of those kinds of things. Yeah, I loved it. I loved her book and I loved her as a guest and the information that she shared.
Yeah, it was chock full of valuable information.
Yeah. And it's funny because we did cover so much. And then as soon as we stopped recording, I thought, darn it, there was one thing I really wanted to cover that we just didn't have time to cover. And I even shared that with her and said, maybe Debbie and I will talk about it in our co-host intro. And she said, oh, I really hope you do, because this is an exercise that our listeners can do that I think could be so powerful. And I would just be so curious to hear how it goes for people. And essentially, it is this spin on how normally like in a professional situation, for example, or an academic situation, we often get feedback that's considered constructive feedback, right? Constructive criticism. Here are the ways you could be doing better than how you're doing now. And she does this exercise that kind of turns that on its head, and it's called reflected best self exercise. And what she does this at school. She's a professor at Yale, and she asks her students to collect feedback from other people on when they were their best selves. And it's funny because in the book, she talks about how people get so anxious, they lose sleep before doing this exercise, and how it just goes to show how powerful our inner critic is. It's so much easier for us to hear and take in the negative and the faults and the things we need to change, and not so easy to take in the good things people see in us.
It's funny you say that, because as soon as you said that, gave the instruction, I thought, ooh, I don't know if I want that information. It definitely feels like it's a little act of courage to ask for that. And I could see how it's really valuable.
Yeah. And she's done research on it and says that the exercise is beneficial for improving well-being, resilience, and you'll like this, Debbie, that it can even help prevent burnout and improve creativity. And so even though it's not an easy thing to do, it is a pretty simple thing to do. And so it's essentially asking a handful of people to provide positive feedback about you. So moments when you showed up as your best self, and that you want to ask people from kind of a broad group, like both friends and colleagues and family. And, she said that when this happens, it tends to be very moving for people and also very enlightening. And she even has a link to the exercise and the details. So in case I'm not explaining it well enough, you can actually find this specific reflected best self exercise at www.iamsov, S-O-V, and that's SOV is part of the word sovereign, which is in her book title, .com. So www.iamsov.com.
We can link to it in our show notes for today's episode too.
And I think we should challenge the four of us co-hosts should try to do this ourselves and see how it goes.
Ooh.
We could even have a co-host episode about it.
Good idea. That'd be fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there's our call to action. And we hope that you get as much out of this episode as Debbie and I did. Hey, everybody. It's Jill here. And I'm so excited to bring you my guest today, Emma Seppälä. Emma Seppälä is a best-selling author, Yale lecturer, and international keynote speaker. She teaches executives at the Yale School of Management and is faculty director of the Yale School of Management's Women's Leadership Program. A psychologist and research scientist by training, her expertise is the science of happiness, emotional intelligence, and social connection. I love those things. Her best-selling book, The Happiness Track, has been translated into dozens of languages. Her new book is Sovereign, which we are here to talk about today. Seppälä is also the science director of Stanford University's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. Emma, welcome to Psychologists Off the Clock. Thank you so much for joining me.
And thank you. I'm happy to be here, Jill.
Yay. Well, to start, I have to admit that when I received your book and I saw the cover, the title, and the name, I consider myself a relatively intelligent enough person, but I honestly had to look up the meaning of sovereign. It's like, I kind of sort of think maybe I know what that means, but I'm not really sure. So why don't we start by you telling us what you mean by sovereign, why you titled this book Sovereign?
Yeah, thanks, Jill, for asking that. As a psychologist, I didn't find that there was a term that corresponded to what I meant by it, even though we might think we live in a way that's, completely free and so forth. Actually, many of us fall for thought patterns, behaviors, addictions, habits that stand in the way of our ability to show up as our best self. And a large percentage of people on their deathbed feel like they didn't live the life they wanted. And so sovereignty is the ability to be able to see through and become free from the many ways in which we stand in our own way so that we can show up as our best self, but also enjoy our life, but also show up at our greatest potential to be there, as an instrument for goodness, for inspiration, for creativity, for whatever it is that our life wants to express.
Yeah. And it is pretty much spelled out in the subtitle of the book, which is Reclaim Your Freedom, Energy, and Power in a Time of Distraction, Uncertainty, and Chaos. Mm-hmm. And I loved this book. I think you did such a good job with this. I love the way that you structured the book. So you have chapters on sovereign self, sovereign emotions, sovereign mind, relationships, intuition, body. We probably won't get to all of these. Mm-hmm. But in each of these, you start with, a compelling personal story, often your own, sometimes that of other inspiring people. And in each chapter, you discuss how we get bound, which is essentially the opposite of sovereignty. And then you give several techniques for how we can get unbound or how we can move toward sovereignty. And of course, the best part is it's all based in psychological science. It's not just ideas that you came up with off the top of your head. So I thought that we could start with sovereign self. So tell us, what kinds of things contribute to a bound self? Or maybe what is a bound self and what contributes to a bound self?
Yeah, so my day job is teaching executives at the Yale School of Management. And I'm also the faculty director for the Women's Leadership Program, so women executives. And I see so many of these highly talented executives, men and women, who come in, and I see what stands between them and their greatest aspirations is often their relationship with themselves. Mm-hmm. And that's the irony. We could think, glass ceiling or, toxic workplace or this or that. But once all of that is taken care of, if you still have a relationship with yourself that is toxic, then you're not able to be at your best. I often say, what are some words that you said to yourself the last time you made a cringeworthy mistake? And people will say, you're such an idiot and worse, and it's so heartbreaking because everybody I speak to, all the executives I teach, and whenever I ask this question, it's the same thing. And when you think about it, it makes no sense.
Right. We'd never say that to another person.
Never.
Right? You wouldn't say that to your child. You wouldn't say that to your friend. You wouldn't say that to your boss or anyone. So It's crazy that we say this so commonly. We say this to ourselves. Yeah.
And to me, whatever it comes from, social conditioning, I call it programming, but it doesn't make any sense at all to have a self-destructive relationship with oneself. So even people who are like, well, I don't have self-loathing. It's like, well, how do you treat yourself? And so anyway, that is one way that we know binds us because research shows it leads to greater anxiety, depression, fear of failure, less willingness to try again, and the list goes on. But the opposite is true if you have a life supportive relationship with yourself. And that is when we know that people show up at their greatest potential. They have better mental health, even better sleep, and better relationships. Because at the end of the day, when you have a highly, say, self-critical relationship with yourself, you're also going to do the same thing for the people you love the most and want to hurt the least, right? Mm-hmm. So it actually even makes sense in terms of relationships. When we have a more life-supportive relationship with ourselves, we end up having better relationships and being more successful overall. So that's just one example.
Yeah. It's interesting when I talk to clients about self-criticism, you talk, one of the causes of being bound, as you've been saying right now, is this inner critic, right? This self-criticism. And when I bring up the idea of self-kindness or self-compassion, some people react rather negatively toward this idea because they really believe that self-criticism of what could be a true weakness or of a mistake is necessary to improve, to grow, to not make the same mistake again. But you differentiate between self-criticism and self-awareness.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So self-criticism is really putting yourself down, judging yourself harshly, critically every time you make a mistake. And the consequence of that, as I was saying earlier, is all of these mental health challenges, more anxiety, depression, fear of failure. You become less resilient, right? Mm-hmm. But self-awareness is knowing, oops, I've got a weakness for, say, cigarettes. Let's say you have that weakness for, maybe I shouldn't have any around the house, right? But you have an awareness, or maybe I shouldn't put myself in a context in which they're going to be available, right? So it's self-awareness, but you're not beating yourself up for it. You're aware. Yeah. Oops, this is not my strong suit over here. I need to work on that. And you're going to be much better able to work on it if you're not also tearing yourself down. Because when you tear yourself apart, you're breaking your resilience. You're breaking your ability to withstand as well.
I love the research on, well, the fancy term is the abstinence violation effect, which I know you know what that means, but for any of our listeners who don't, it's like getting a case of the screw. It's like you just brought up cigarette smoking. So maybe you quit smoking and you're doing great, and then you slip and you have a cigarette. And getting the case of the screw, it's just like, oh, well, I totally blew it. I might as well just go back to smoking and I'll smoke, 5 packs of cigarettes and start again next week. And the research shows that the more self-critical you are of that slip, the longer it's going to take to get back on track, and the more cigarettes you're going to smoke in the meantime. And when you practice self-compassion, you get back on track much more quickly and smoke fewer cigarettes in the meantime. And I just think that's so incredibly powerful. And it may feel counterintuitive that we must be hard on ourselves to learn and make it better, make a change. And that's just simply not what the science says.
It's like if you're in an abusive relationship where the person is constantly beating you up, is that going to make you, that's just going to make you weaker and weaker as opposed to, right? And so it's so crazy that so many of us have been conditioned to be in an abusive relationship with ourselves. And I know these words are strong, but it's on purpose that they're strong, because what I try to do in Sovereign is just wake us up to the different ways in which we're standing in our way so that we stop doing that, because every single person on this planet has so much to offer in their own uniqueness and their own gifts. And we're at a time also on the planet when things are just so crazy, for lack of a better word, that it's like, no, we need everyone to show up as their best self, as with all their gifts, with joy, with hope.
It's important to say too, like, it can be an uphill battle because we are designed to have a negativity bias, right? If we think about evolution, we were going to survive if we were checking our status. We were against the group, right? We were making sure that we're good enough, that we're contributing, so we don't get kicked out of the tribe, so we don't die. That inner critic is like, am I staying on my toes? Am I doing what I need to do? It's in there by design to try to help us survive. And that negativity bias, we focus on perceived threat to the exclusion of other things. So I do think it's a muscle that you really have to practice flexing by broadening that field of vision, by not just doing the self-critical thing, the social comparison thing, where it's like, it does take some effort to practice self-compassion, to talk to yourself in a different way, but it's absolutely doable. And, and as the research shows, it's also really helpful.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people will be like, well, how do I do that? I mean, how do I even start?
Right.
And so I like to keep things really concrete for people, because I think we need concrete tools. And one tool that I really love is just thinking about your basic needs. Like, if you're taking care of a child, then when was the last time they had something to drink? When was the last time they had something to eat? How much did they sleep? How much did they get their wiggles out? Like, you kind of have a sense to avoid a meltdown. You've got this mental checklist going, right? And of course you have a pet, you make sure that they've got their food, that their bowl is full, that they're able to drink, And so one of my most basic suggestions is doing that with ourselves, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference between ourselves and the pet or the child? It's like, oh, when was the last time you got up from your chair and took a walk? Let's take you for a walk. Let's get you a big glass of water. You haven't, little things like that can seem so simple, but you're reprogramming yourself to have a relationship that is not just supportive, but that's nurturing. Yeah. Because who are you not to deserve as much love as someone else is?
Absolutely.
And that is going to help you so much to be so much stronger in the face of everything that life has to throw at us. And you know what? Life has a lot to throw at us often, but right now, even more so, it feels like for a lot of people the last couple of years. And so this is when we really need to break that pattern. And for many people, they've learned this pattern from their parents, from their ancestors. And so it's sort of almost been passed down, so strongly. Sure. But this is kind of the time to let's switch this up. Let's break these kind of patterns that are not serving us.
Put yourself on your to-do list.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Well, I'd love for you to tell your story about how you personally moved from bound emotions to sovereign emotions when you were in college.
Yeah, I was really shy in college, but I had a crush on someone and he was going to the meditation sessions that were there. And, everyone now has been to a meditation session, but at the time, meditation was just considered kind of weird. Not very many people did it. And, but I thought, let me go and maybe I'll meet him, even though this is kind of weird. And turned out it was Korean Zen, like strict, very kind of formal and a bit austere of a practice where you sort of stare at the floor for an hour with little to no instruction and you're supposed to not move and keep your eyes open to stare at the floor. So I was there and I was like, this is hell. I am never doing this again. I hate this. This is awful. And by the time the bell rang at the end, could not get out of there fast enough. And I was like, I feel great. I'm never doing this again. And at the time I had an eating disorder whereby whenever I felt down, I actually think of it often as an addiction because I think it's very similar to addictions. Whenever I felt down, I would binge on whatever. And that was a pattern I'd been in for a couple of years. And after I'd binge, I'd always cry. I mean, it was just this cycle that was going nowhere. But it was this habit that I was not able to break. Anyway, the next day I came back to my dorm room and I was feeling low again. And I saw a leftover pizza that looked disgusting and it wasn't even the kind that I liked. But I thought, oh, great, here's my chance to binge. And then all of a sudden this light bulb went off in my head. And it was an insight I'd never had before, which was, you always cry after you binge. Why don't you cry first? And I believe that meditation, that 1 hour of meditation had opened up the self-awareness. Remember we're talking about self-awareness just now? That self-awareness is something that can be cultivated. In that one session, there was enough self-awareness that had been entrained in my mind for me to get this insight. And I got this insight and I thought, great, let me do this. And I went on my bed and I cried. When I was done crying, I sat up and I'll never forget this moment. And I was like, oh, I don't want to binge anymore. It was gone. And I realized then, whenever I had these emotions to just allow myself to feel them, and then I would be free from the compulsion, addiction, destructive habit that was there. And, many of us, if we're really honest with ourselves, do something when we're not feeling well, whether it's doom scrolling or drinking or overworking or over-exercising. I mean, it can look saintly, right? But it's some kind of compulsive behavior. I just don't want to feel bad, right? And our society throws so much at us. Do this, do that, buy this, watch this. There's so many people making so much money off of most people not wanting to feel their emotions.
And there's a lot to feel bad about.
And there's a lot to feel bad about.
Yeah.
And negative emotions are part of our life. And what's really interesting too is I think in the US in particular, there's this sense that you're supposed to feel good all the time. It's not so culturally acceptable to feel the negative emotions. And so people feel lost when they feel the negative emotions. In China or India, it's very much understood traditionally that the negative is part of life and that you really can't feel positive if you don't feel negative too. They go to hand in hand. But in the US, there's this understanding, it's like the pursuit of happiness only, right? And so, there's something wrong if I'm feeling bad. So regardless of all the reasons why, we tend to want to avoid that. But as a consequence, we get bound up in these kind of addictive behaviors, trying to desperately not feel. But the problem is that if you don't feel, that emotion sticks around and you either stay in the addiction or you can also get numbed out. And if you're numbing yourself from the negatives, you're ironically also numbing yourself from the positive. That's the irony of it. And I've worked with a lot of veterans with trauma, with post-traumatic stress, and oftentimes with post-traumatic stress, there's a numbing that happens where you can no longer feel the negative. It's almost maybe like a protective mechanism that happened at some point in the nervous system. It's like, you can't feel the negative, but then you can't feel a positive. And so we ran a study with combat veterans where we had them do a breathing workshop called Sky Breath Meditation. And when they did that, it helped them so much recover from their anxiety, from their post-traumatic stress. And many of them no longer qualified as having post-traumatic stress at a sort of a significant level. They were no longer meeting the threshold of having it. But I remember one of the veterans afterwards telling me he had developed a crush on a mutual friend of ours. And he said, Emma, and he was telling me about all the ups and downs of that. And then he was like, Emma, I feel good. I feel bad. I feel, the celebration of it all, Yeah. And we have to gain the courage. And part of sovereignty is having courage to feel. But when you allow yourself to feel, just like a little child allows themselves to feel, they have no choice, right? Their emotion runs through their body. How long does their anger last? A couple minutes. How long does an adult's anger last? It can last an entire lifetime if they don't process it, if they don't feel it.
Right.
So that's just one of the ways in which you can get that sovereignty.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this 1,000 times with the podcast, but like all these things we do to distract or avoid or suppress or drown our emotions, they work or we wouldn't do them. They work in the short term to give us relief. But in the long term, like you're saying, like really keep us stuck in these cycles and prevent us from moving through
That's right.
whatever it is that's going on. So like I said in the book, you give lots of different techniques for people to move toward this sovereignty. And I'll bring up, because you had just said part of sovereignty is courage. If I'm remembering correctly, you say like awareness plus courage equals sovereignty. Is that right?
That's right. Plus a full tank is the ideal, right?
Because when a full tank. Oh,
so
yeah.
that you're not totally, if you're totally drained and burned out, it's quite challenging.
So do you have like a favorite technique for like when you are having bound emotions, suppressing or avoiding, drowning, whatever it is? Do you have a favorite technique for unbinding, for moving toward sovereignty?
So in that moment, I mean, this awareness is key, and awareness hurts, right? We don't want to feel bad. But one thing to think about is that emotion is energy in motion. It's energy, right? That's why, maybe people would experience like the angry kitchen cleanup, right? Like you're mad and you're just going to do something like that. But if you think about it as that, then so you don't want to distract yourself from it. You're with it, but can you move with it? Either dance or write it out. I remember one time I was feeling so lonely, and I came to work and I just had this unbearable feeling of loneliness. And I just sat down and wrote an article on loneliness, and it just came out, and I published it. And later I had people, to this day who message me and say, thank you for that article on loneliness. It really helps me. So able to do something creative. My child too was once missing his aunt so much. And then he sat down and he was crying, and then he sat down and he drew a picture of himself and his aunt to get on a piece of paper. And it was just his way. He like intuitively, children are so intuitively knew this was a way to do it. So allowing yourselves to feel, with that courage, because yes, it means you have to feel pain, but that's how you're going to be free from it. So don't suppress, don't numb. But then how are you going to move it? Maybe you're going to move your body. Maybe you're going to move your emotion. Maybe you're going to sit and meditate and just let it move through your system. Maybe if it's anger, you're going to do something, go exercise, or run or something like that, right? So, but thinking of it as energy and motion and trying to avoid the, let me just do something to get rid of it feeling.
Right.
Just, know what? It's here. Welcome.
Yeah.
Thich Nhat Hanh, as Buddhist monk, always said, give it a hug. If we can welcome the emotion, it'll actually dissipate faster than if we try to shove it away, because that's when it just hangs out and won't budge.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You talk a lot about imprints. So tell us what you mean by imprints. Like what are they and where do they come from?
So imprints are the messages or experiences that have locked us into a certain way of seeing or experiencing things. So in Sovereign, I talk about my friend Star, who was one of the executives that came through our women's leadership program. She is an African-American woman. And she said that within her community, she had sort of learned the imprint she was carrying was that she needed to stay safe at all costs. And she was in a job working for the government. And she felt safe in that job, but she yearned to expand. And the moment I met Star, I mean, leadership is written all over her. She was like the leader of that whole program. I mean, she just stood out. She's just like her name, Star, a real star, And part of her longed to expand beyond her current roles. And she was in a battle. She said, I'm in a battle with myself about this, because she both looked, this imprint was there, but she had outgrown it. She had seen it. And she said, you have to sort of stare it down and realize it's not the truth. And then she actually went on and has gotten these amazing jobs in the corporate world. And what these imprints can do is they can keep us locked in to a certain way of living or thinking that keep us in a place where we're smaller or crammed in uncomfortably. Or we're locked up in fear or another emotion, such as fear. And another form of imprint can come from trauma. I mean, and in fact, that imprint that Star was talking about comes from trauma also, of course.
Racial trauma.
Yeah, racial trauma.
Yeah.
And then, any kind of trauma can create an imprint. For example, the veterans that I work with, they would be like, I know there's no danger in the mall, but I have to brace myself for 20 minutes before I can get in, because the trauma of being in a crowded space from the past was still living right here in their present, right? But other imprints could be ones that we pick up in our news, in our media. I mean, in all that we take in over 60,000 gigabytes of information every day through all of our media. So there are countless ways for us to condition our minds, right? So some of it will be the trauma and some of it will be just the messaging we've learned. But whatever has kept us smaller or bound up in fear or anger or any of those kind of things are imprints that are negative. There are also positive imprints, right? Inspirational people, inspirational moments, whatever. But the negative ones are the ones that keep us bound. And how do we become free? We have to be able to see them, become aware of them, for which practices like meditation are key. And we also have to be able to heal ourselves from the trauma. For example, like I mentioned earlier, we researched a breathing practice called sky breath meditation for the veterans. And that helped them free themselves from the imprints that were holding them back. And so those are key things so that then you can move forward. And one of the favorite people I interviewed for that chapter was a high up leader in the military whose job it was to create imprints for the enemy. So for the Taliban, this person's job was to create messaging that was going to make the Taliban think certain things, right? So messaging is, just like advertisers create messaging or newspapers create messaging that in fact shape how you end up thinking, right? So that's what his job was. And so I said to him, wow, so how do you go about, your day? And he's like, well, I always look for the intent behind whatever message is coming my way. And is a very sovereign person. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, how do you do that? Like with your kids, for example? And he said, well, when we're in the supermarket and they want some unhealthy cereal, I say, oh, why do you want that cereal? And they'll be like, oh, because it's like so colorful and look at all the little cute little cartoons on it. And he's like, oh yeah. So why do you think that the packages are decorated in this way? And the kids will be like, because it's fun. It makes me happy. And so why do you think that they wanted it to be fun and happy? Oh, because then I would want to buy it. Like kids will love it, and so on. This sort of teaching the child to start to recognize imprints from a young age, which I thought was really fun.
That's great. That's brilliant. I love that. And I think what is the intention behind it so that you can see through, messaging that is meant to benefit someone else, possibly to your detriment.
Yeah.
And not being sucked in, not letting that become part of your imprint. And I like that you don't claim that like we can totally erase or get rid of these imprints, but that we can cultivate like a healthier context to try to diminish these unhealthy influences, right? To notice what the intention is of the colorful, cute cereal. And I'm curious, like, what are a couple ways we might do this? Or maybe you can share, you work in academia, and if there's ever a place that I can think where there is some unhealthy messaging that threatens to create imprints that could keep you bound, it is in academia. I worked in academia for 9 years. And so how do you stay sovereign working in an academic environment where these influences are here?
A couple of ways. One, I have a dedicated meditation practice. I meditate twice a day, and I do the sky breath meditation every day as well, because it helped me a lot with trauma imprints from living in New York during 9/11. And every day it gives me an ability to sort of clear my slate so that I'm not so enmeshed in the things going on around me. That's one way. And the other way is that I make my choices. Like I remember someone trying to get me to take on more than I wanted in terms of a role that was being offered to me. And I would have needed to go into the office, and I wanted to work from home. And the person said, well, you'll be faculty. And otherwise you'll just be a contractor. And I said, that's okay. I'll be a contractor. I'm perfectly fine with that. But the person's intent was, clear what they wanted, and I was not going to fall for that. That was not what I was going to do. And now it turns out I became faculty anyway. But
I love that. That's great.
Some people said, well, how did you have such good boundaries with this person? And I said, well, first of all, oftentimes it's when you've had the opposite experience with other people. You sort of learn along the way that, okay, I'm not going to let myself fall into someone else's agenda. But I become more perceptive of that. We can also fall for the imprint. I want to have the best, most glorious role. It's like, really? Why? Is it going to make you happier?
And I think that's where a lot of like the courage part comes in too, because you have to have the courage to risk that you might not become faculty. You have to have the courage to tolerate your fear that you'll be judged or they'll think you're not holding your weight. I think we do so much out of fear. That's the bound part. But we overestimate the likelihood that bad things are going to happen. And we underestimate our ability to cope with them. So in this case, you still became faculty. And even if you didn't, it probably would have been just fine because now you have the freedom to do the other things that matter to you in your life and really getting clear on what's important. And if becoming faculty is genuinely really meaningful and important, great, by all means, do that, but do it as a move towards something that matters to you, not because it's the result of these imprints that are coming from external messaging and expectations and things like that.
Absolutely. Oh, and I was contractor for a while in that position because I'd chosen it. But, I'm on this Facebook alumni group for Yale alumni. And one day somebody put the question, what do you do for a living? And how would you advise someone who wants to get there? Presumably for the younger alumni to learn from the older alumni. And what was interesting is in the comments, nobody actually answered the question. The only people who responded were people who were really unhappy in their profession. And they were mostly physicians and lawyers. And they all were saying, don't do things for glory and money and glory. And it's so heartbreaking to see that. People who had fallen for these imprints of, I must get the job that is the most prestigious and so forth and so on. And then they hate it. And you think, wow, all these physicians are supposed to be taking care of patients and they hate their job. And you just think, and they did it for prestige. Really, if you go into medicine for prestige, but the one person who had something nice to say, and it was a physician, I think she was doing some community work with homeless people. And she was finding a lot of meaning and purpose in her work, But she had not been going into it for prestige. She had been going into that profession to help others, And so one of the reasons I wrote my book is to help also young people realize you do not have to fall for these things. Don't fall for things that other people have and they're not happy,
Right.
And as you probably saw in the book, I shared a lot of embarrassing stories about myself in there. And, there are moments where I thought, well, definitely people could judge me or colleagues could think whatever they wish to think about. But I also realized, we're all human here. Are we really going to pretend like we're something else? I'm not playing that game. I don't think that's useful for anybody.
No, and it's so relatable because we all make mistakes. And I think for a successful Yale professor to be able to say, I forgot about a keynote. And there was a story about how you took your kids to the park an hour away and forgot that you had a keynote you were supposed to be doing online. Our fear is that people read that and go, oh my God, how could you? You're the worst. You're such a loser. But I think the much more common reaction is, wow, even somebody who is a successful Ivy League professor, even she has these human moments. So maybe it's okay that I have them too. And I am a big proponent. It's why I started the interview admitting I didn't know what the word sovereign meant, right? Yeah. I don't need to pretend that I have knowledge I don't have. Is, that, and you talk a lot in the book about authenticity and how important it is for us to be our authentic selves. And this is what is going to connect us, that common humanity that is a part of compassion and self-compassion. And those connections, they're how we thrive. We need connection to survive and to thrive. And this is actually a good segue because I loved your discussion of sovereign relationships. And we talk a lot on the podcast about all of the robust science now showing that the presence of quality relationships is the predictor of health and well-being. And you focus on an interesting concept that you call positive relational energy. So can you talk a little bit about what this is? And maybe we can talk about what some of the keys are and the types of energizer. Let's spend a little time. I think this was really important.
I think we all know what it's like to be around someone who drains our energy. Whenever I say that to a crowd, everybody's always like, yes, nodding vigorously. Yesterday, I was sharing
as I am right now, even though people can't see me. Yeah.
I was sharing this with some executives yesterday, and someone in the room said, yes. But we also know that there are some people around whom we feel more alive. We feel more enthusiastic. We feel more energized. And those are because perhaps of our negativity bias, we focus on the quote unquote energy vampires. But what about these other people, which I like to think of as sunshine people? one of my colleagues actually did research on this. So he is an organizational psychologist, and he was looking at large scale organizations, and he noticed that there were these subgroups that were super productive. Like, what was going on there? Why are there some of these subgroups doing such amazing work and standing out so much? And what he realized is there's always one person at the center of that group that was someone, and I remember him telling me, it's embarrassing to use this word, Emma, but they have positive energy. They're a positive energizer, and they're sort of giving life, a life-giving influence on everybody around them. And so then he and his colleagues ended up researching these people. And I think we know who these people are. Hopefully we have at least one such person in our lives. And what it comes down to is that these people are very much values driven. You know, they are the kind of people who have empathy and compassion and honesty and integrity and kindness and forgiveness. And what happens to us when we're around people like that is that and they have humility too. And how do we feel around those people? We feel seen, we feel heard, we feel valued, we feel appreciated. And most importantly, we feel safe. And when we experience those things, it's energizing as opposed to depleting. And it doesn't mean sometimes people think, oh, well, I'm not an extrovert or like a highly charismatic. It has nothing to do with that. Yeah. And another question I often ask executives is, how do organizations command loyalty? Usually it's money and benefits, right? But that means that the company next door can just buy your loyalty, right? If they pay you more. But then I invite people to think about, and I invite you and listeners to think about this too, was there someone in your life that was there for you, a mentor, maybe in your childhood, young adulthood, or professional life, who supported you without wishing for anything in return, who just wanted the best for you without any self-interest whatsoever? And then if you were to think about that person, if that person texted you right now and said, I have an emergency, can you please call? Would you drop absolutely everything to call them?
Yeah.
Yes. That is loyalty.
Right.
Loyalty is begotten in this relationship with another human being who profoundly had your back and who saw you for who you were, for your best self. That is so profound.
Yeah.
And positive energizers have the ability to do that. And it's not, it's not neurosurgery. It's nothing crazy.
Well, and the good news is people aren't born positive energizers or negative energizers. You make the point that anyone can become a positive energizer because, I read this. I love that you call it sunshine people. And I think, I hope I'm a sunshine person.
Yeah.
I want to be a sunshine person, And you say you can't become a sunshine person, even if that is not your sort of natural tendency right now. You can become this, and you highlight there are 6 keys to positive relational energy based on the research of Kim Cameron. And I mean, it's essentially what you were just saying. It's caring for, being interested in, and seeing the best in others, providing support for other people. So kindness, compassion, avoiding blame and forgiving mistakes. So like not holding grudges, inspiring each other, focusing on what's going right, emphasizing meaningfulness, treating others with basic human values like respect, gratitude, trust, honesty, kindness, integrity. And that was it. That those were the 6. And so I found this so like hopeful and uplifting because even we're probably all doing some of this well, at least some of the time, but it's almost like there's skills that we can build and practice if we want to be more of a positive energizer in the world.
Absolutely. And I do talk about that there are 3 kinds of energizers and only one that really is effective. And I think we might be able to recognize some of these types in people we've worked for or people we know. I mean, one type is, and I call this the crusher type. They may be very energizing to some people. For example, maybe they're very inspiring or they're doing really cool work, but then they crush others. So one example I give is of this science lab in which the scientist is very well known and celebrated and does really, really cool work. But when you go and visit the lab, you see that behind the scenes, it's a backstabbing, unhappy lab because they have a star at the front of it and who does not mentor or take care of the staff. And they're extremely disgruntled. And I always think what would happen to the scientist if he actually took care of his people, how much more successful would he be?
I think the crushers are who they're talking about when they say never meet your heroes. Because on the outside, they're your hero because they seem so amazing. And then you actually learn the whole picture and you're like, oh, you're actually kind of an asshole.
Right. And I hope that's not true for all
crushers.
heroes. I hope that's not true for
No,
all
I don't.
heroes,
Right.
but
I don't think it is. Yeah.
But certainly it is there. And I think we've, we may all have experienced or met someone like that. And the second type that also leaks energy is the sacrificer. And this is the person who is doing amazing things, is very much, operating with human values and is taking care of the people that they're working with, but to a fault where they are actually expending more energy than they have and not taking care of themselves. And so they end up depleted. And one of the examples I give is this woman who was an educator and a principal, and she'd come from, her parents had immigrated from Haiti when she was young, and she'd seen just sort of how broken some of the educational systems are, especially in lower income neighborhoods in the US. And she wanted to really take care of the school she was taking care of. Anyways, she gave it her all, and she ended up in the hospital. And so because she was not taking care of herself along the way. Now, what would have happened if she had not leaked energy in that way? That's what she's actually done. Now she has done that, and that she's just turned into the third category, which is the star. And the stars are the ones who, again, are doing all of this amazing work in the world, whatever it is. They are contributing in a way that is uplifting, that's inspiring to others, but they've balanced it with compassion for themselves, with taking care of themselves. And the sky is the limit for these people because they don't have an energy leak. And they are uplifting to others and to themselves. And get this, the research shows that when you are uplifting to others, it also uplifts you. And if you're taking care of yourself and the people around you at the same time, then really the sky is the limit. And this is all of our potential.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's such an important and, critical topic. And it's something even, in therapy where the different types of therapy that I've been trained to do, there's never a component that's like, hey, make sure that people have quality relationships in their life or have positive relational energy. It's just not part of it. And the longer that I've been in this business, and of course, paid attention to the research, the more I'm, making sure to check in with people about all of this interpersonal, kind of stuff, because it's just critically important to our well-being. And I also that you include chapters on intuition and body, because I think those are other places that we tend to ignore. I mean, maybe intuition, especially in some ways, we've even been taught for women, certainly, and people of color and other minorities that, you have to be nice or you have to be polite or you shouldn't ruffle feathers or you shouldn't offend anyone. And that often means you're ignoring your intuition. And that can really come at an expense. And then same with bodies. I mean, how often are we tired or sore or hungry or thirsty or have to go to the bathroom and we're like, go, 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 do. And, just ignore all of these things that are such a basic part of our well-being, our ability to be sovereign. And I think sometimes that gets skipped over in mental health because people assume it's like, well, duh, of course you're supposed to drink water and get sleep. But even though it's, well, duh, we kind of need to be reminded just how important it is. And you really talk about the power of simply returning to nature, sleep, eat food that's in nature, be in nature, let go of the processed food and some of these things that I always appreciate when there is attention to those things, because they are really so important. Do you have anything that you wanted to say about either intuition or body?
Well, just to wrap up that thought of yours, I mean, one of the things that I think in mental health is least spoken about is the impact of food. And research shows that if you eat very little fruits and vegetables and then you go to eating 8 or 9 servings a day, it's like going from happiness levels of someone who's unemployed to employed. I mean, that's just the jump and the leap. And if you think about all those communities that are deprived of that kind of food, or people who just choose not to eat those kinds of foods, and yet it can make such a difference to your mental health and therefore to your resilience and how you show up in the world. And like you said, sleep is so critical. And I think especially now with so much entertainment at our fingertips, it's so easy to skimp that and then to feel the anxiety or to feel the burnout. I mean, and again, nature is so profound. the impact of exposure to nature is so profound that even if you can't go outside, but you just have a plant on your desk, it makes a difference. And if you don't even have windows, just having a poster of nature has an impact. That's how deeply wired we are to benefit our physical, mental health just through the impact of exposure to nature. And then intuition was a chapter where, people were like, oh my gosh, you're a scientist, you're talking about intuition. I was like, yeah, I mean, the truth is that, almost everyone has had an experience with intuition. I start the chapter with the story of my friend Kushal, who was in one of the Twin Towers during 9/11, and the guards were saying, stay in the building. And his intuition told him to run, and he saved his life by literally a hair. He ran out of that building. And what would have happened if he had, masked that intuition and just decided, no, I'm not going to listen.
If he listened to someone outside of himself
Right.
instead of listening to himself. And I think we do that all the time.
I know. And that's where I'm inviting readers to become aware of their intuition again. And one of my colleagues and friends he's a neuroscientist who does research on intuition and decision making. And he found that when decisions are complex, it's best to go with your intuition. You're going to end up making a better decision. And he defines intuition as sort of as an emotion, as a feeling, right? The gut feeling that you might have. And he's shown this in multiple research studies. And we know that we're programmed to think logically and reasonably, which is great, but we're programmed out of listening to our own selves. And yet physiologically, we're constantly picking up cues. So for example, if you're around someone who's masking anger, they're angry, but they're pretending they're not angry, your heart rate increases. So I think we've all had the experience of being around someone where we don't feel comfortable and we don't know why. The chances are our physiology is picking up something's off. So if someone is suppressing their anger, your heart rate is increasing, you're not feeling comfortable, but you don't understand why logically, but you have this feeling that you want to back away, but your body's already picked up cues that our intellect is much slower at picking up, right? So, and we register inauthenticity as threat. That's just how just like animals do the exact same thing, like in equine facilitated therapy, like therapy where the therapist has a horse and then they work with patients. If the patient, say it's a child with trauma, comes up and pretends not to be scared of the horse and is like, I'm not scared, I'm just fine. The horse is very anxious. It's moving all over the place. As soon as the child says, I'm scared, the horse calms down. The horse doesn't understand English.
Oh my gosh. So they're not reacting to the kid's fear. They're reacting to the authenticity.
That's right. They physiologically register inauthenticity as threat, instinct. We have instinct too. And so what I'm recommending here is to get back in touch with our intuition and instinct. Not to say that you need to make all your decisions from that place, but be aware of what the messages are that are coming from inside, and don't discard them, because they may be the key to your sovereignty or even to saving your life, as it did for Kushal. I also talk about Lynn Tilton, who's the owner of the largest women-owned business in America, and how she had this intuition that she needed to go and buy these companies that were being abandoned by all the consulting companies for debt. Like people thought she was crazy.
Lost causes. Yeah.
But she had this intuition that she needed to make sure that families don't lose their main providers, because that had happened to her. And so she went with her instinct and she went and bought these companies and she turned them around. Companies like Styla Makeup, like companies that became much bigger.
Wow.
And she went and she talks about it. She's like, you have to go with your intuition. But you also need your intellect. So your intuition can be the propulsion, but then you need the intellect to figure out, how you're going to do this. But, and she's become one of the most successful people out there.
That's so cool. Right. You're not discarding the facts and figures and statistics. No. And in fact, I think it can be part of that intuition. Like, it makes me think of Marsha Linehan's wise mind, which is where, your emotion mind and your rational mind intersect. Yes. And it's that like grounded kind of sense of knowing, gut, intuition. People call it lots of different things. I actually wanted to read a couple things that I just found really impactful and that I think sort of sum everything up. So this is at the end of the book, the parting note. This book came to me as a current of energy and insight. It compelled me to write this book. I felt it long before I put pen to page, and I hope you too have felt it. A current of energy, of delight, of truth, of boldness, and of profound awareness. Perhaps it felt like a remembering, because somewhere deep down, you've always known that you are sovereign. You were born sovereign. This book is an invitation to come home to yourself. And as you honor yourself more and more, you will find you also honor others and the planet as a whole. Because you realize we are all connected, not separate. And I'm getting choked up right now just reading that. I think you're a beautiful writer too, by the way. It's a lovely book. And I just thought that really summed up, what your wish is for people to get out of this book. And then I have to end on, you have several poems throughout the book. Did you write these?
Yeah, they all came to me in writing. Yeah.
So I get to the first one on page 8, and you can see, I'll show you in the thing. It says, did she write this? Do you see that? Because I noticed that, the poems aren't cited. So I thought, well, she must have written them, or she would have said who wrote them. And they're all beautiful. And the very first one spoke to me so much. And I actually shared it with a client yesterday or today. I shared it with her in session yesterday, and then I took a picture and sent it to her because it fits so well with, she's really wanting to kind of play big and struggling with staying small out of fear, essentially. Yes. I'm like, oh my God, she wants to be sovereign, and right now she's feeling bound. And we had a funny exchange because she said, would it be weird if I tattooed that on my arm? And I said, oh, along with the part that says, did she write this? So we're laughing about my little note in there. Okay. So here's the poem. And I just think this is a beautiful thing to end on that I hope will inspire listeners in the same way that it did for me and for my client. And bear with me because I'm already getting choked up just getting ready to read it. Okay, it's called You Did Not Come Here. You did not come here to play small, to hide yourself, to blend into the wall. You did not come here to dim your light, to crouch in fright, to lie in a ball. You came here to light a fire within your own heart, that it might warm and light the fire within others' hearts, that it may set ablaze old rotting beliefs, that it may light the way to greater truths, that it may burn to ashes systems of old, grown toxic with mold, that you may make room for new plants to bloom. Oh, wow. I love it.
Thank you so much, Jill.
It's so inspiring. See, I'm like, if ever I tell my husband I cried, he's like, oh, big shock. Because it doesn't take much to get me emotional. But I just thought that was such an incredibly inspiring message. And I saved it for the end, but in the book, it's right at the very beginning. I think it really sets the intention of like, this is why you are here. This is what this book is going to help you to do.
Yes.
So thank you for writing it, and thank you for being here. This has been fantastic.
Well, it's my pleasure, Jill. And thank you for seeing the intent behind the book. And I really hope and pray that many readers will be able to sort of free themselves. And I've already heard from people that just reading it has shifted how they interact with their life. Yeah. I've heard people like stop drinking alcohol, or, started doing, started doing sovereign mornings where they're just reclaiming their mornings, and then it impacts their entire day. And just, so thank you, Jill, for reading
tell it. If people want to learn more about you, what is the best way to find you?
So my website is emmaseppälä.com, but I have a book website, iamsov.com, where I have more resources for people who are interested in digging deeper. And then I'm on Instagram at The Happiness Truck and on most social media.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.